very, very good morning to all of you who are joining us today, the faculty members, the organizers, and most importantly, the students. Right. So in today's discussion, I really wanted to demystify what artificial intelligence is, and as Professor Ganguly mentioned, 1 hour is probably too little to get into the details of the inner workings of generative AI. But I would want to explore the age of AI with some reasoning questions. Right. To get started, I'll have an activity for each and every one of you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 images. Right? And I want each and every one of you to take your time to think about that image and try and describe that image in 1 word. Right? You don't have to speak it out. You can imagine what that word would be. Right? But I would want you to take a moment and reflect on. Probably I will request the Arju login to kind of go on mute. We are getting a lot of feedback on this side. So what I would want you to do is think about each of these images that I'm going to show you, and just try and describe, if you can express your feeling about that particular image in 1 word, right? So that's the first one. Take a moment, think about what this image means to you. How does it make you feel? And do you have 1 word, or can you think about 1 word that comes to your mind when you try to describe this image? Is there a lot of feedback that is coming from my end?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Is there a lot of feedback that is coming from my end?
Yes, sir. Sir, now it's fine.
Now it's fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we will continue then. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Right? So that's the first image I want you to think about. The next image is Van Gogh. What does this image mean to you? If you have a notepad, you can write it down. Not a problem.
Van Gogh.
Yes, it is a Van Gogh, but what does it make you feel?
The Starry Nights by Van Gogh.
Yes, it is. It is indeed Starry Nights. But does it make you feel lonely? Does it make you feel excited? Does it make you feel adventurous? Does it make you feel, whatever word you use to describe what it makes you feel?
It always reminded me of Tom and Jerry and horror vibes.
Wonderful. So Tom and Jerry, that's one perspective, right? Tom and Jerry, Tom chasing Jerry around and them doing their shenanigans all over. Excellent. But that's a long description. Is there 1 word? So it kind of reminds you of childhood, or it brings back memories, right? Would that be a right way of describing it? I'm going to show you another image. what does this remind you of? Or what does this make you feel? I've heard this being described as a wallpaper, as graphite, as, all kinds of different abstractions have been used to describe this particular image. It's one of the most famous paintings in the world, by the way. So I've given all of you some time to think about a word that you would associate with these paintings, right? So essentially the question that I wanted to ask you was, do you feel that the words that you used to describe these images could accurately describe what you were feeling? That's the important question. Can we do a quick show of hands? How many of you in the auditorium feel that the words you chose to describe the images were represented the actual feeling that you had? How many yeas and how many nays? Could I ask the moderator to perhaps give me an indication of which team won, the yeas or the nays? How many people felt that the word that you used, that the word that you picked, described what you were feeling? And can we have a show of hands for people who felt that the words that you picked did not accurately describe your feeling?
Sir, for most of us here at the auditorium, it felt that it was a little bit more arbitrary.
It was a little bit more arbitrary, exactly, right? So that is what I'm trying to get at. Because what we think about, right, when we feel about something is not necessarily the text that we produce and output in. It is so the text is an abstraction of the thought process that we have, right? If enough people felt something that they could create a common word, it creates a language, it creates a vocabulary, right? But there is always this imprecise representation of what we are thinking or what we are feeling in terms of the words itself, right? So before getting into artificial intelligence, perhaps it is worthwhile to think about what do we really mean by intelligence, or if we wanted to deconstruct intelligence before we looked at what artificial intelligence is, right? When we think about intelligence, what are the parameters that we would bring in? Firstly, if you look at it, I mean, intelligence is it's a very complex and multifaceted construct, right? And it's been studied extensively in psychology and cognitive sciences, right? And while there are no universally agreed upon definition of intelligence, but we generally assume or generally accept that it encompasses some key attributes, right? One of them is memory, right? When we, as our moderator mentioned, Starry Nights reminded them of Tom and Jerry, right? That's a memory. So memory plays a crucial role in intelligence by allowing individuals to retain and retrieve information, although it can become a little fuzzy over time, right? We learn from past experiences and then we apply that knowledge to new situations. And there are different types of memories. There is short-term memory. What did I eat in the morning? What was my breakfast? What is my plan of action for the day, right? So these are short-term memories. And there can also be long-term memories. Pythagoras formula, right? A square plus b square equals c square, right? So you can also have long-term memories. You can have short-term memories, right? And you also have working memory. For example, when I'm giving this talk, I know what I'm going to talk about next, right? I know what is the context in which I'm talking, right? So this is what is called as my working memory. But in general, for any kind of intelligence, it is important to have memories. The next thing we look for is context, because when we are processing some information, there is always some context associated with that information. Let me take an example of the word bank, right? Now, when I'm using the word bank in a financial context, right, I want to withdraw some money from the bank versus saying, using the word bank in the context of, say, a riverbed, right? I am going to take a walk by the river bank, right? Or, for example, when I'm using the word bank in the context of a road, right? The roads are well banked to allow cyclists to pass through. So there is a different meaning associated with the same word depending on the context itself, right? And this context can be what we call societal context, or it can be practical context, right? Societal context basically means that I should have an understanding of the social situations, of the interpersonal dynamics, or to be able to effectively navigate a social interaction. I would not use swear words when I am interacting with my parents or my faculty members, right? Why? Because that is what is societally accepted. So that is the societal context. What is a practical context? A practical context means that if I give an irrelevant information, which is not applicable in that particular context, right? So the ability to kind of apply knowledge and skills effectively in real world context to solve everyday problems, that is what we mean by practical context, right? I might know, I might have an encyclopedia of knowledge about sheep, but if I am going to go to a shop to buy some meat and I bring out my extensive knowledge, it is not, it doesn't help me in that interaction to buy meat, right? So practical context is very, very important when we are using this kind of intelligent behavior, right? What else? The third aspect of intelligence essentially comes from there being emotions associated with intelligence, right? Because a lot of times the decisions that we make are based on our current emotional state, right? And this emotional intelligence refers to the ability to perceive or understand and manage or express emotions effectively. Some people may feel a lot of things, but they may not be able to express it verbally, or they may not be able to express it in written text, right? So emotional intelligence essentially involves skills such as empathy, understanding where the other person is coming from. It comes from self-awareness, right? It comes from self-regulation, from social awareness. So all of this kind of combined together into what we call is emotional intelligence. The next part of intelligence comes from attention, right? And attention is the ability to focus during a particular discussion, right? So it is ability to think about, I'm having an interaction with an individual. What was I talking about? Where have we interacted before? What was the context of the conversation last time we met? Is it that I am just hearing the words that they are saying, or do the words mean something more, right? Is the person in front of me looking for some emotional support, or are they distressed and they want to talk to me about something? So that is where attention comes in, where you put in your focus to selectively filter out the elements of the conversation that are important and kind of ignore all the background noise that is going on, right? Say, for example, you are driving, you are focusing on the road. You are not, in your peripheral vision, you know what is going on in the, alongside, but you are not focusing that. You are not focusing on, the advertisements that are passing your window, right? So your attention becomes very, very focused. And this kind of attentional control, what you choose to spend your attention on, right? Where you decide to spend sustained attention, that kind of dictates, your intelligence levels, right? Again, as I said, there is no one overall definition for intelligence, but we kind of understand intelligence from various use cases where we see people who are successful are able to comprehend information from around them, even non-verbal communication from around them. These are very, very key attributes of intelligence. I want to bring out two more points over here. The next one is creativity, because intelligence also encompasses the ability to generate original ideas, original thoughts, right? To think in a way that has not been thought of differently and be able to reason about it, right? So that is where you have, you have thoughts that come outside the box. Art is a great example, because art forms, they are usually non-descriptive. There is no standard form of art, right? There is no, so art is probably a better way to connect with your thought processes than written text, right? When you're writing a program, when you're writing a piece of code, there is a very well-defined syntax to it. Right? You cannot be creative with that. But when you are writing poetry, you can take significant liberties in terms of how you use your vocabulary. When you are creating art, even that limitation of structure goes away. You can pick any color, you can choose any form. Art can be in the form of a sculpture, or it can be in the form of a paper cutting, or it can be in the form of a drawing, right? But it represents, it's a closer connection to being able to say what you feel when we do not have the words for it, right? That's where creativity comes in. And creativity essentially involves divergent thinking, right? It encompasses imagination of things that you have not experienced before, right? And it requires the ability to make connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, right? There is the last point that I wanted to touch upon was something called vocabulary, because how would you express yourself if you do not have a language, if the language that you speak is not understood by the person opposite to you, right? So for example, if you are speaking in Khmer and to a person who speaks French, your words may not make sense to each other, right? So the vocabulary comes under a segment called crystallized intelligence, and this pertains to the accumulation of knowledge, skills, and kind of expertise that are acquired through learning and experience. So it includes verbal comprehension, it includes vocabulary, to an extent cultural knowledges, or specialized knowledge in a specific domain, right? So if you were a carpenter and you said that I need a door that is 2 feet, right? You would know what context that 2 feet in. When you go to a tailor, you will see the tailor is making a lot of measurements. They'll just spit out some numbers, and the person who's writing them down already knows what those numbers mean. Where do those numbers plug in, right? So if we deconstruct intelligence, we find a lot of concepts underlying what true intelligence is about, right? Now, on top of these, there is also cognitive abilities, right? Where we use our senses to understand something, whether we are seeing something, whether we are touching something, whether we are hearing something, right? So these are our cognitive abilities backed by certain mental processes. Not only that, we also have something called analytical intelligence, right? Which is the ability to solve problems using formulas that we know, right? To be able to analyze information critically, do a lot of data interpretation, evaluate evidence based on some rationale, being able to apply certain axioms, and using some postulates to derive further logic from that, right? So these are part of what we call is our analytical intelligence. And as a human being, we express all of these. When we talk about a well-rounded, intelligent individual, we essentially talk about all these underlying concepts that when they are interacting, they are attentive, they are listening to the context, they are banking on their memories, to be able to come up with solutions that are practical, that are probably not biased by their emotions, and that are expressed using words that the other person will be able to understand, right? So that is what we mean by intelligence. Now, if we now add artificial to intelligence, right? What does artificial intelligence really mean then? If I try to replace memories with artificial memories, as computer science students, we understand that we can have databases. We can store as much data as we want. We can store text, we can store records, we can store images, right? So computer systems have the ability to create very precise records, right? Now these records, it's not like if I keep a record for 1 year or 2 years, the records will change, right? Human memories, they tend to kind of become a little fuzzy over time. And, what was a bad memory over time kind of loses its bitterness. But with algorithmic systems, what you enter as memory or what you define as a database will remain as that database. Right? In terms of societal and practical context, computer systems are good with rules, with well-defined rules. So we have over time built the ability to create what are called rule engines, right? Where multiple rules can be applied on a piece of data to kind of understand what the next action should be, right? Moving on to emotions. With artificial intelligence, the concept of emotion itself does not arise, but it can be simulated. So emotions are represented as contexts, right? Because if I wanted to create a chatbot that sounded funny, I would have to teach it the rules or give it examples of conversations which sounded funny. So it can emulate that behavior, but for a computer system, there is really no concept of emotion over there, right? In terms of attention, computer systems can be programmed to focus on certain things and leave out other things. We already know that in case of image processing capabilities, computer systems are very, very good at identifying, putting, processing an image, creating a bounding box around an object of interest, and kind of ignoring what else is going on. For those of you who were watching cricket yesterday, right, we have the ability to do decision review systems. Decision review systems are nothing but they have multiple cameras which are tracking the ball frame by frame, and they're tracking only the ball. They are not tracking the context. They're seeing, based on the past data, there are projections that are made in terms of where that ball would end up after a few seconds, right? So, in terms of attention, yes, computer systems can provide you undivided attention. In terms of creativity, here is where things get a little fuzzy, because computer systems can create, it can arbitrarily, if you look at creativity as a problem of searching, computer systems can search very, very fast. Can it come up with new logic? We will address that question shortly. The last part, in terms of vocabulary, computer systems can be taught labels, because vocabulary is nothing but a whole bunch of labels. So if we train a computer system with saying that, this kind of variation is labeled good, this kind of variation is labeled bad, then computer systems can actually start classifying things, right? And applying the relevant labels to it. Of course, there are errors that can creep in, right? Which is why, there is a certain degree of fuzziness to the response, right? So we see that if we are to build artificial intelligence, there are certain blocks in the intelligence roadmap that can be leveraged by artificial intelligence. So this kind of brings me to another question. Famous words which said to be or not to be. Now if I ask you, what does this mean to you? To be or not to be? There are several ways this can be, there are several ways I can respond to this. I can take it out as one of Shakespeare's most famous phrases, and I can look at it as a philosophical dilemma. To do or not to do, right? Action or inaction. So, which is better? it becomes that both sides can be argued differently. So I can look at it as a philosophical dilemma. I can look at it as just a group of words, right, without any particular meaning that randomly happens to be there. If I was randomly picking a word, I was opening my dictionary and I randomly picked a word from the dictionary, there is a probability, howsoever small, that I will end up with this set of 6 words after 6 tries, right? So it could just be a group of words without any meaning to it at all. If I wrote a Python program and said that pick a word from to, be, or not at random and make this selection 6 times, then one of the selection is going to be to be or not to be. There is no artificial intelligence there. There is nothing that the program is doing. The program is blindly just selecting from a list of words, right? And yet it comes up with something where we as human beings are ascribing meaning to this. I'll give you another example. What if I call this as a mathematical tautology? Why? Because my proposition is to be. So to be or not to be. So a proposition or not the proposition is always true. So if I analyze it from a mathematical perspective, it becomes a tautology. Right. So herein comes in my question, is there really artificial intelligence? If it is, when you are coming up with a bunch of text with some words, who gave it meaning? Is it you who is interpreting meaning from this, or is it the system that knew that it was proposing something to you? Where is the thought process originating? And I think that is a very, very essential question that we need to answer when we deal with artificial intelligence, right? Because, now that you are in college, right, you will graduate and you will take up different roles, and whatever role you take up, you will be doing a lot of research in every role, right? And research kind of creates new knowledge. So I lovingly sometimes call it that when you are doing research, you are just searching over and over again. So I call it search start, right? So typically, the way we searched was we went to libraries and archives. For those of you, and there are, most of you will not remember this, but maybe some of your faculty members will remember going to libraries, going to archives to kind of look for information. How did we do that? Well, we went up, we picked up a library card. There used to be these paper catalogs that we could look up. We identified which shelf the book was in, which shelf and which row the book was in. We would go there, identify the book, right, and take it and get it checked out. So the advantage of having this kind of records, right, is typically that you have a lot of historical records and it kind of forms your primary source of information. But the disadvantage is that there is no keyword search. You cannot just automatically search because the entire, some of the older archives, they are not digitized. So unless you actually go and read that piece of information from a piece of paper in a particular row, in a particular shelf, right, you will not have access to that information. And second thing is that many of these, these books, they are all physically distributed. Not all libraries are interconnected. So you may have to get a book on an interlibrary loan, right? So typically archival work came about in terms of going and visiting libraries. And for those of you who started doing your research in the 2000s, in the post-Google era, you figured out that you could access a lot of information over Google, right? What were the advantages and disadvantages? Well, if you went in and searched for something like a scholar.google and you went and searched a particular paper, you would get, you would get the primary source. You are getting a digitized version of the primary source. Not all the sources of information that we have been digitized. Some of them are available as digital libraries. A lot of the current journals are available as digital libraries, but a lot of the historical works may not be available. A lot of works are still published in newspapers, as blogs, as as articles or journals, which may not be digitized, right? But the advantage of having a search engine like this is you get primary search, you get searchable abstracts, you will get searchable citations, like information about that. But the disadvantage of searching on a digital knowledge base is there could be what we call our paywalls, right? You need to have access to a particular website or a particular journal to be able to access their information. This is still fine. But if you look at Google, the way we are searching now, if I wanted to search about something, I may get a blurb that is taken from Wikipedia, right? So what Google is telling is, Google is a search engine, but this information is actually hosted by Wikipedia, so it redirects me to the information source. In Wikipedia, I can go up and look at the history of artificial intelligence as I was looking over here. And in Wikipedia, I'll go and see that certain things, they have labels in them. So I can actually go into the edit page and see who has edited, what is the source from which this information has been captured, who is the person who has actually written about it. So the advantage is that it creates this links of knowledge bases, right? The disadvantage is that with Google, there is a lot of search engine optimization that pushes the wrong kind of websites up, right? So it may not be the relevant information, or when you are searching for something, you might get so many pages in return that it creates an information overload. This is where perhaps something like a large language model comes into the picture. This is where the generative AI tools that you have been hearing about, they really begin to shine. And you will have, you would have heard of platforms like ChatGPT by OpenAI. You will have heard of Bard, which was Google's project on OpenAI, which has been renamed as Gemini. There is the Llama project that is coming out of Facebook. There's another project called Perplexity. So a lot of these large language models have essentially been created to be able to help navigate that search process a little better, right? In the sense that now when I go and look up the same question. For example, I ask it a question saying, what are the major developments in AI? List it as a table. Who are the major personalities and their contributions? I now have a quick snapshot of what has been going on. So this form of cohesive information gathering, it is very different from the way we are used to gathering information in a Google era, right? So the advantages are that it creates summarization. It gives me a summary view of what is going on. For writing complex prompts, I can actually have nested prompts. I can write a prompt to create more prompts that I will run in the future. I can have programmatic access. So with those of you who are using ChatGPT, there is an entire ecosystem called Playground, which allows you to create programmatic or API-based access to ChatGPT instead of a text-based interface. So you can have ChatGPT integrated into your website as a chatbot, right? But there are certain disadvantages to using ChatGPT as well, or for that matter, any kind of generative AI tool, right? And we will see this very, very shortly, because fundamentally where the generative AI tools are different is that it has generated a bag of words from the data that it has been trained on. So there is no traceability back to where that source of information is, or if there is even a source of information, right? Or if there is a particular violation of IP that has happened, if that piece of text has been taken from somebody's book that we are not aware of. So it creates this disadvantages of IP violation. It can create misinformation and biases, and we will discuss them shortly. But this lack of traceability as to where did that information come from is the most worrying part about generative AI usage. And that is why we will need to understand what are the ethical concerns in terms of using generative AI. right? So just as an overview, if you are planning to use any of the generative AI tools, and right now there are market researchers which are suggesting that upwards of 50-60% organizations are starting to allow generative AI usage among their employees, with another 20-25% evaluating pros and cons of using a generative AI tool. But generative AI creates information democratization, which means that it allows information which was earlier not accessible because they were physically in a different location, or information that was hiding behind paywalls, or information that was available to a few select people, right, is now suddenly available to everybody, which is why I called it information democratization. In doing so, what you will figure out is that instead of writing code, the ability to write comprehensive prompts is becoming a skill set by itself. The complex prompts are, again, where you have to dip into your creative capabilities, into your empathy capabilities, to be able to ask the question in a way where the system can give you a response. And you can create prompts for, for quick fact checking if it is a well-established fact, right? You can use it for summarization. You can use it for translation, for, citation checks, for keyword extraction. So you can create complex prompts for language-based tasks, for programming-based tasks, and so on. So I'm not going to touch too much upon the prompt engineering part of it today. I'm going to focus more on the ethics part of it. What is right to use and what is not right to use? Because as I mentioned, you can use generative AI for information democratization, but at the same time, you can use it for misinformation democratization as well, which means that generative AI can be used to create hypothetical situations. You will see that in terms of its training biases, right? Depending on, if you look at, for example, ChatGPT, a lot of ChatGPT's training data comes from the Library of Congress, Wikipedia, the US Patent Office, a lot of papers that have been published, a lot of blogs that were written in English. So quite naturally, the way the language has been used, or the text that have been used to train the system, it has its inherent biases. It is not trained on the sense and sensibilities of, say, for example, Indian culture, Indian context, because those books which were written in vernacular were not available as part of its knowledge base. So if I ask it questions like, what are the physical characteristics of an ideal man, right, you would start to see the biases in terms of what it has been taught based on the kind of literature that it has been exposed to, right? But what we can do is, so as not to make the response offensive, we can put guardrails. And you can see that there are certain guardrails in place where we are saying that, look, there is no ideal definition. So after the result is created, we can have guardrails which put out disclaimers saying that this information is biased, right? I'll give you another example of, I asked it a question saying, what is the current sentiment about Russia? And as you can see, the first thing that ChatGPT responds is by saying that its training data was as of January 2022, right? So there is it doesn't really know about current happenings that has been going on. Why does it not know about current happenings? Because when you create a large language model, you have to train it on large data sets, right, of course. And once you have trained the data set, that model, building up that model is an exhaustive process. So you cannot keep on regenerating or rebuilding that model in real time. It has to be built up to a certain cutoff date, and then you can ask it questions with respect to the knowledge base. So it gives us broad generalizations and it gives us dated information. So you have to know how long it has been dated. So you should not be asking it questions related to financial transactions, questions related to current news and political discussions. It will not have that kind of information. The third thing is I can use a generative AI tool for significant amount of misinformation generation, right? For example, here I have a press report that is about Tanzania's, landing a man on the moon, right? And of course, when I ask a generative AI tool to be creative, right, it has actually given me a pretty decent press release with essentially what are called made up names, or in the context of generative AI, we call them AI hallucinations. Incorrect information that is presented and packaged in a way that it seems rational or it seems reasonable to to a person who does not really know the entire context, right? So it becomes very, very easy to create misinformation. Here I will use another word. I'll introduce you to another word called tortured sentences or tortured phrases. And we use that word when we see that a commonly used phrase has been purposefully made more complex in order to create a different reading of it. And this kind of usage of tortured phrases kind of lets us know if the content is generated using AI. Right? With this background of saying that Gen AI is a powerful tool that is gaining a lot of adoption in the market, from doing creative content writing to writing pretty much college level or the kind of code that you would expect from a team lead kind of a role, right? To being able to take on a lot of automated activities by themselves, right? Where does the ethical ground lie? Because generative AI is here to stay, and generative AI content will find its way into various kinds of articles, LinkedIn posts, publications, and all of that. We cannot wish it away. So instead of resisting this digital tide, it may be more pragmatic, or it may be easier to accept its inevitability and create an ethical framework so that we can deal with Gen AI generated content, right? So it ensures that as we kind of work with Gen AI, it does not constrain our own creativity. So because I call it a 5P framework, there are 5P words over here. And the first one is proofreading, right? So P1 is proofreading, starts with a P. And I think we can start with proofreading because it is something that is reasonably ethical. Spelling and grammar checks have been a standard part of word processors for a while now. If you use, whether it is Microsoft Office or Google Docs, right, you will find that even in your browser itself, you will get autocorrects, you will get grammatical hints, right? So for a while it has been used and its usage is very much acceptable. So what you will find is that these large language models or LLMs, which have been trained on libraries of books, they intrinsically have a large vocabulary and models for sentence structures, right? So therefore, they are very, very effective linguistic tools for proofreading, especially for non-native writers, right? And in this case, the ethical dimension or the ethical dilemma, I think, is pretty clear-cut, because if AI tools are aiding in enhancing the content without fundamentally altering its essence, then arguably they serve as efficient assistants. I'll give you an example, right? So I have an example over here where I'm saying, run a spelling and grammar check on the following paragraph. So I have a paragraph over here, and I've asked it to do a grammar check. It has corrected the grammar for me, and ChatGPT recommends what are the changes that it has made. It has changed the hyphen from after ethical to a colon, it has capitalized proofreading. So it has made certain changes and it has indicated what are the changes that have been made, right? And I think this is reasonable. I think all of you will agree with me here. The next P is productivity, right? When we talk about a productivity enhancer. So I'm stretching the argument a little bit further, and because AI or generative AI comes equipped with an ontology of topics, right? It has classifications of topics, from its various knowledge bases. So it can not only fix grammatical errors, but given a detailed enough prompt with raw ideas, it can construct narratives or simulate scenarios, right? So it can be used for creating test data, for example. It can be used for formatting citations. It can be used for even performing linguistic compressions to fit like within a particular word limit or so or long, right? So again here, from an ethical perspective, as long as generative AI remains a tool that supplements human innovation without overshadowing it, right, we should be seeing Gen AI in a positive light. Many of you are very, very comfortable in using calculators for, a number of your classes. When we were growing up, it was a big no-no. In fact, I remember that when we were, applying for our, 10th standard, 12th standard, we could not use a scientific calculator. Forget about taking it to class, right? But over time, we figured out that if we know how to do multiplications, if we know how to use the formulas, then the calculator is just a productivity enhancer. We can focus on learning the concepts to be used rather than the actual calculations themselves, because there are machines which will do them much more faster, which will do them much more accurately, right? So, for example, if I know what I wanted to talk to you about, and I have a set of scenarios that I want to talk about, I can ask ChatGPT to say, write a 100-word narrative incorporating the following concept. So here what is happening is, I am giving ChatGPT the kernel of the ideas, the basis of the ideas on which it must work, and what ChatGPT gave me in return was a well-constructed sentence which encompasses the ideas that I have given it. So I think this kind of usage is still reasonable, right? I don't know if you're writing papers yet, but one of the most tedious works in writing papers is when you have, different papers that you want to cite, and each of them, they kind of have, this written in a particular format, and you have to take that information and put it into a different format for a particular publication, right? You have different kinds of publication format, IEEE format, the APA format, there's the Harvard format. It's a very tedious, boring job, right? So what you would want to do is, you can ask ChatGPT to format it in a particular type, right? And it saves you time, right? It is anyways not very intellectually challenging work. So when you are using ChatGPT to do that kind of work, it saves you significant amount of time. So even this usage is perfectly all right. The third case is paraphrasing, and this is where the role of generative AI kind of becomes a little bit more murkier, right? Now, we have to take into account that generative AI is trained on large knowledge bases, like, as I mentioned, Wikipedia, digitized libraries, academic papers, so on and so forth. So, generative AI, it has significant powers in reinterpreting content, right? Be it in terms of rephrasing or in terms of summarization. And that is where it can pose challenges or significant challenges to attributing its rightful source. And it is here probably where one must draw a line between interpretation to plagiarism. This is where the so-called ethical tightrope becomes thin, because it requires a certain amount of discernment, it requires a certain amount of knowledge base from the reviewers, from the human reviewers, right? Where is it that it is doing something right? Where is it that it is doing something wrong? For example, if I ask ChatGPT to generate a list of 5 important papers on large language models, and I get 5 papers out of it, notice that I have a small summary for each of these papers. This summary is not something that was originally written by the authors as an abstract to their paper. This is an interpretation or a summary that is generated by ChatGPT or a generative AI tool. When you are creating summarizations like this, right, human language or the ambiguities of language can create misinterpretations in the response themselves, right? The use of, say, double negatives, for example, right? It can create confusion in terms of how it gets paraphrased or rewritten. But even when we are doing a summary like this, I think it's still reasonable to use ChatGPT for this kind of usage. So one of the questions that kept coming back is, if you are using ChatGPT content, if you are using content from ChatGPT in your term papers or in your papers, how would you let the world know that you have used ChatGPT papers? Right now, typically when we cite a particular author for in a paper, we use a reference like this, where we tell that these set of authors published this paper in this conference on so and so date, and that kind of becomes a reference point. Anybody who wants to understand what the state of the art was, they can go and actually look up that particular paper. In many cases, we may have to cite internet resources, where we are saying that I read this piece of information written by so and so person on their blog, which is available in this particular URL, and I retrieved it on so and so day. So those parameters, the URL, the date of retrieval, right, that becomes a marker for that particular source of information. But with generative AI, every time you ask it a question, generative AI is going to look back into, is going to use its transformer model and is going to create again a bag of words. Inherently, when you use generative AI, there is a concept of a temperature, which says that every two response must, how much will they vary, right? How will the words vary in two responses? And even with low temperatures, what you will find is even if you ask ChatGPT the same question twice, you may get very different results, or you may get different interpretations or different responses of the same result, right? So there is no way of you being able to say that I asked ChatGPT this particular question on so and so date and I got this response, right? Because anybody who wants to validate that, anybody who goes and asks ChatGPT the same question will most certainly get a different response, right? So there is a lot of discussion that is going around in terms of how will you create an attribution if you are using generative AI models, right? There has been some models, Professor Baker proposed something called a gains model, wherein he said that, hey, can we use which generative AI tool I used on which date, what was my requested question, what version or model was I using when I tested this, what was the update date of that model. So I can use that information, but because the responses are variable and the responses that change, the responses are very ephemeral, we may still need to evolve our mechanism for referencing ChatGPT generated content in our formal communications. This brings me to the 4th P, and the 4th P is about plagiarism. And plagiarism is where this is a darker alley coming in from paraphrasing. With paraphrasing, I was getting a snippet of whatever was written. But with plagiarism, there is undoubtedly a malicious intent in terms of taking somebody else's content and modifying that in a way such that the original source cannot be found. Because with generative AI's ability to reformulate existing ideas, the temptation to present unattributed work becomes very, very palpable, right? while we have developed certain tools like Turnitin, and there are certain AI AI text scoring capabilities, and there are some tools that are available to detect AI generated content. Generative AI has also evolved to create what are called humanized texts. And we are not only generating humanized text, we are generating humanized text that correspond to a particular writer's writing style as well, right? So here we see that our ethical dilemma, when it comes to plagiarism, there is no dilemma. Plagiarism is wrong. It is plain wrong, right? So whenever an article comes into this phrase, into this domain of being plagiarized, where I have asked, I gave it the sentence that I was talking to you about, and I asked it to rephrase the original paragraph from the underlying concepts, avoiding the words that were there in the original narrative. That is a malicious intent, where I am purposefully changing I'm using the concept. I don't want to create an attribution, and I am not using any of the words that were there in the original text, so that I cannot take a section of the string and locate it on Google, because the plagiarized version will not be found, right? So this is certainly down the slippery slope, where we are already taking on unethical means. The last part is where it is most contentious, and I call it prospecting as the 5th P. And in prospecting, what is happening is, with a lot of, whatever it is, writing pressure or productivity pressure or whatever it is, what I'm doing is I am using generative AI systems to create reams and reams of content, of practically useless content, but each of them is just a nuanced variation of pre-existing ideas. So instead of me thinking about, hey, this is the idea that I want to share with the world, I am trying to ask ChatGPT, what are the new ideas that I can talk about? Are there variations of that particular idea, right? So what it is doing is, we are now it opens up the door where we are creating content that is biased and trained on data that is already known with ChatGPT. And by creating that content goes and it is fed back into a generative AI system for the next generation of large language models. So there is a feedback loop that is getting generated, which kind of overshadows original human content. Right? So it is not, I argue that it is not innovation, but it becomes an inundation of massive text. If, for example, think of yourself as a reviewer in a particular conference. If you got papers which were generated in ChatGPT, how would you feel about it? Right? You would feel cheated. You would feel like the person who has sent you that paper did not spend enough time coming with a new idea and has just thrown a bunch of ideas at you, hoping that something will stick. It is hoping for you to make a mistake so that their paper goes through, right? So the implications of this kind of prospecting behavior, it is very, very dire, because it puts at risk any kind of review processes. And this is where there is a stark deviation from what is scholarly integrity, right? So this 5P framework, it can probably be used as a feedback mechanism for those who are editing, to be able to understand who are the participants, who are the people who are responding with generative AI content rather than coming up with new content. I'll give you an example of this kind of behavior that has been exhibited. This was back in probably 2003, when 2004, 2005-ish time frame, and there was this 3 chaps out of the CSL lab in MIT, and they created a paper called, they created a system called SciGen. SciGen, what it did is it took random garbage from different kinds of papers and mashed it together and created a IEEE formatted paper, right? So they went ahead and submitted this junk paper to a conference, And the paper got accepted. So they took it even further and actually went and presented a garbage presentation on this garbage paper, which was auto-generated. The paper got published in a conference as well. So what the team did is they went ahead and published this experience of pushing through auto-generated content through the review mechanisms, because of which various editorial boards started to create additional mechanisms to be able to look out for this kind of content, right? Today we are back again in the same place where instead of SciGen, we can use generative AI to create essentially content which we are not able to defend, let me put it that way, right? Because this is not innovation, it's just inundation. Prospecting, in my opinion, is probably the worst case scenario where the ability to create new content is really lost, where you are completely dependent on a generative AI tool for doing even the most basic function. If I summarize my discussion from today, what I will say is that if you are using generative AI for proofreading and purposes as such, I think it is reasonably okay. If you are using generative AI for productivity enhancement, it is mostly okay. There could be a few corner cases where it may violate the terms of service, the terms of usage. If you are using it for paraphrasing somebody else's content, I will strongly recommend that you use with attribution and with care, so that you would not want your hard work that you put in terms of doing a particular project to be just taken by somebody else and without acknowledging that you built it. If you do not want that kind of behavior with you, I would not expect you to also prioritize or also do that kind of behavior to somebody else as well. So if you are paraphrasing, use with attribution and use it with care. Plagiarism, definitely a no-no, not at all okay. If you are using somebody else's content, you have to let them know, because they have spent time and effort in building up that particular content, right? It is their intellectual property. And finally, when it comes to prospecting, I would say that definitely not okay, because the ideation has changed from being your idea that is being supported and supported by generative AI to it being a bag of words being thrown by generative AI that you are using to boost up credibility without thinking through what has happened or thinking through if those arguments actually make sense, right? So with that, I will end my talk, right? I will be happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir, for your informative session. Sir is now open to any questions that you may have.
Good morning, sir. I'm Shiva Prajatji. I wanted to ask that is GenAI just a modern way to emphasize web scraping technology? Because what I have seen recently is even if you use ChatGPT, it can't design architecture properly well. It just scrapes someone else's code, considering everything is stored in GitHub, and now it has a wider access to all the source code presented in the platform. So how will you react to this?
So again, I would say that with generative AI, you have to look at the fundamental construct, right? The fundamental construct in generative AI is a building block called a transformer and the concept of positional encoding. What positional encoding tells us is that a word, when you ask it a particular question, a word is to be looked at not in isolation, but in the context of what else has come before it. How large of a context window you have depends on the model that you are using at present, right? In this context, so when you are looking at ChatGPT, when it is giving a response, it is not actually, there isn't a human intelligence that is behind it telling it that we should write a piece of code like this. What is happening is it's starting off with a few rules, and then it will start off with a seed word, and it will look at what is the most probabilistic word, what is the probability distribution of positional encoding of words that comes after this. Now, something like a computer language, whether you are looking at Python, whether you're looking at, say, Beautiful Soup or Selenium or something like that, when you're using these tools, computer languages are very, very well structured, and by definition, our compiler does not accept ambiguous language. So you will have very similar implementation of algorithms across multiple GitHub implementations across the world, right? So with this kind of access, in terms of the chat, in terms of generative AI, it is just picking on the next word instead of thinking whether it makes sense or not. After it does the whole thing, there are a few guardrails and a few checks that it will run. So in terms of web scraping, it can help to a certain extent, but if you have, because simpler web scraping mechanisms can be implemented with generative AI, you also have websites that are built with, auto-rendered content. You have websites that are built with session-based transactions, with, tokens that are exchanged before a transaction can be happen to prevent the misuse or running automated tools for scrapping them, right? So generative AI is good at some of the simpler tasks at present, something that probably a web scraper with 3-4 years of experience can develop. But in order to create really complex web scrapers where you are taking advantage of, say, Python's multi-core behavior, right? ChatGPT will not be able to give you that kind of code because the reference implementation for such code is far fewer. So whatever is easily available content, ChatGPT will be able to give you a summary of that very, very quickly.
Thank you for your participation. Well, okay.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Vinayak Bhardwaj from BTech CSE second sem. My question would be related to the job economy, because we know that AI is going to be an integral part of our society in the coming next years, of course. But what is your take on how it would be shaping the job economy? Because again, we know that many of the jobs would be disrupted and many jobs would be created as well. So how people should train or embrace the new age of AI?
So I'll answer that question in two parts, right? First of all, yes, there is a significant push in terms of, if you look at IT projects, every other project that is coming in is building in the usage of automation to reduce the workforce on a particular project year on year, right? So there is that pressure in terms of resources. So what was happening was, if you look at a typical IT team, right, where you have, say, 5 developers, 1 team lead, 1 tester, 1 project lead, right, who's working on that. The team lead was responsible for essentially, working on sprints with all the developers, looking at their buggy code, and then reviewing that and helping them move forward, right? So a large portion of the team lead's role was essentially to help fix bugs in the code that was coming in from the team. If I can get even buggy code from Copilot or generative AI, right, then the team lead can just work on that and fix the bugs there itself, right? So suddenly a team of 8 or 10 people needs probably 4 or 5 members. And that is where the challenge is. with generative AI usage, you have to be in control of how to use it. You have to be able to validate the response that generative AI generates. So you have to be better at creating the response than generative AI. That is my, in the framework that I propose, it equates to using ChatGPT or generative AI as a productivity enhancer, and then you are able to take on a lot more tasks and become more valuable to the organization, right? But if you are taking on a task which is repetitive and can be automated, chances are it will get automated because the pricing and the cost dynamics works in favor of generative AI tools. So yes, it is going to create a displacement in terms of the kind of roles that are going to come out in the market. A lot of, say, for example, automated voice calls, chatbots, right? So telecalling got replaced with IVR systems. IVR systems got replaced with chatbots. Now chatbots are getting replaced with custom GPTs. So that evolution is happening in terms of the job roles, but at the same time, newer kind of roles are also coming into the picture. Newer kind of roles, for example, image annotations or classification or human classification of test data, building some of these algorithms themselves, right? That is where the new areas or a new kind of projects are also coming in.
Atanu, I have a question.
Yes.
One or two questions.
Yes.
Camera will not be visible. So better I stand up and ask you the question. The thing is, my one vital question, are we not losing creativity by using this generative AI? Number one. Number two, while we are reviewing papers, a lot of papers come to us for review, right? How do we understand that it is not a AI generated paper? So it is becoming a challenge day by day, because if one of my scholars, if giving me a paper that I have written it down, how do I verify that it is not a AI generated paper?
So two very, very excellent questions, right? Does it affect creativity? I would argue that yes and no, right? The other day I did a workshop with a few faculty members on using generative AI for creative writing, for building creativity, right? I think in general, in the way our curriculums are designed, we are we are looking for a lot more instant gratification in terms of multiple choice questions, things like that. Going back to writing essays, reflecting, right, creating empathy, those are things that are slightly missing from the curriculum today. So when I do a creative writing workshop, I actually tell people to, okay, let's use ChatGPT as a productive tool, and then look at, let's build a particular scenario. Let's build characters in that scenario. Let's build a personality for each of those characters, right? Let's build backstories. Let's build a plot line. Let's build certain themes that we want to explore further. Let's build some scenes where all this activity is taking place. And very quickly, it creates an environment for them to, if we do this exercise over a day-long workshop, we see them actually start to reflect on their personal experiences, on their creative experiences, to understand that yes, it's a immersive learning experience that they get out of it, right? And what they learn is understanding empathy. So, does it lead to a loss of creativity? I would argue otherwise, saying that it allows us to explore a lot more options and themes much more quickly, right? And focus on things where we are really enjoying ourselves. But if I use ChatGPT more as a shortcut where I do not understand the responses that it is throwing out or the nuances of the arguments that are being made, then I will not be able to defend them in a public forum. right? And that is where I see prospecting becoming such a dangerous thing, because when I am reviewing papers, I am also facing the same problem of significant content being plagiarized or let's say overtly paraphrased. So in that case, one of the strategies that I employ, well, apart from doing a few quick basic sanity checks in terms of looking for direct sentences that have come out from some place, or even something like a Turnitin to do a similarity score, what I really look for is the depth of thought in a particular paper, especially when it comes to the methodology and the interpretation of the results, right? Those are things that I look very, very carefully for, because those are the places, if it's a particular systems implementation, then is the system really doable from what has been mentioned, right? And that is what helps me understand if there is an overuse of ChatGPT for generating that particular paper. Already there is a significant, what we are seeing is that certain people have been misusing the review system very, very explicitly, where they will generate 10, 12, 15 variants of their paper and just submit it across multiple conferences, hoping that there is a weak reviewer somewhere and the paper will go through, right? So that kind of strategy has also been used, and this is coming from probably a wrong way to incentivize publication. What I generally say is that if you really have something to say to the world, then you go ahead and create a paper, publish around it. If you don't have something to say, don't publish a paper, an undercooked paper for the sake of publishing it, right? So if I find a paper which I feel has tortured sentences, has tortured words, or the rationale for the methodology is not very clear, I do mark it as a probable cause to the editors. And if I find such a paper, then I will not spend my time and effort writing a formal review or a full review for that particular paper. I will use ChatGPT to give a response, right? Because I will give you an example. Let me see if I can show you a particular example that had come up recently. So in many cases, if I'm going to use ChatGPT as a research assistant, then I have to make sure that the kind of papers that I'm seeing, it has to be worth it. Is my screen visible? Just give me a sec. So I came across a particular paper which essentially was about sensor networks, and it said, a review of sensing for Industry 4.0. And I found that what this paper has done is that it has just taken content from data sheets of various sensors and just pasted the data sheet responses, right? So there is actually no contribution that the authors have made to the body of knowledge. And if it's a paper like this where literally there is no contribution, or it's very easy to see that there is no particular contribution in this particular paper, then I will actually, write a response saying, this is my honest opinion of this particular paper. So these are lazy authors, there's no prior art, so this is my honest opinion, and I'm going to write a response. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write a review response accordingly. I'm not going to spend time on it. Does that answer your question?
Good afternoon, sir. I am Jyoti Smita Das from BTech CIC 4th Sem. I have a very basic question. As we know, generative AI has a few disadvantages. So what is the reason, according to you, behind the sudden surge in the use of generative AI?
Because we have more influencers than creators. So there is a lot of people who are using generative AI tools for use cases which are meant to create publicity stunts, which are probably which does not come with the integrity of publishing information. So my short answer is that if you treat Gen AI as a tool that spits out a bag of words, you are going to be careful about what it says. You are going to validate the response before you publish it. If you treat it as another human being that you are corresponding with and you trust whatever it is saying, then it is likely that you will pass on misinformation.
This we conclude this session on generative AI.
Thank you, everybody.